7.
When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Beto O'Rourke is dynamite, but not in the J.J. Walker sense, in the Napoleon Dynamite sense.
That's what we're going with?
I think
he made his big announcement yesterday, and he was really emotional. And this is what his platform is going to be. It's going to be about climate change. And watch out if you live in Houston.
We face catastrophe and crisis on this planet, even if we were to stop emitting carbon today, right now, at this moment. We know that the storms that we saw in Texas, Harvey, which dumped the landfall record amount of rain on the United States of America, as long as we've been keeping records, that claimed the lives of too many of our fellow Americans, flooded people literally out of their homes and businesses. Storms like Harvey are only going to become more frequent and more severe and more devastating, and ultimately they'll compromise the ability to live in a city like Houston, Texas.
Evacuate Houston. Check that man's pockets for tater tots.
Are you going to eat your tots?
Totally.
Oh, that's right.
Totally.
Oh, yeah. No,
and some on the left are breaking bad on Beto, despite his celebrity. Josh Voorhees, no relation to Jason, I believe, writing in Slate, Beto has no reason to exist. Beto is missing one important thing, an actual reason to run. O'Rourke would enter the race as a man without a clear political ideology, a signature legislative achievement, a major policy issue, or a concrete agenda for the country. Those in the know tell The Atlantic that Beto is planning to run as a candidate, offering hope that America can be better than its current partisan and hate-filled politics, and that the country can come together. But that, brace yourself, he hasn't yet landed on how he'll propose to actually make that happen. That's more of the empty words Beto's been offering in public since his loss to Cruz. And Voorhees cites what he said in a recent stop in Wisconsin. I don't know where I am on the political spectrum, and I almost could care less. I just want to get to better things for this country.
Well, our country is in crisis.
There's going to be massive migration of tens or hundreds of millions of people from countries that are literally uninhabitable or underwater, that are above the sea right now. This is our final chance. The scientists are absolutely unanimous on this, that we have no more than 12 years to take incredibly bold action on this crisis.
Oh, my God. He was practically in tears.
I need a brown paper bag to listen to him because he induces hyperventilation. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Roger Kimball. He's the editor of the New Criterion and a columnist for PJ Media. Roger, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys again. Gosh, that was some performance.
I know.
It's really. It is interesting. It is interesting the reaction on the left, though. Because it's not just that Slate columnist I referenced. There are some that are very skeptical, almost resentful of Beto, like they don't want another celebutant candidate like they had in Barack Obama. They want the real socialist this time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was thinking, listening to him, that if he were any stupider, you'd have to water him. I guess he must find that plays well to some nursery someplace. But I mean, it's just a string of misrepresentations wrapped in a bunch of non sequiturs and fired by this kind of adolescent schoolgirl emotionalism. I mean, can anyone take him seriously? I've always found the man a joke, but I suppose the people on the left want to win. And Beto is just he's a kind of an aroma, an attitude. He's clearly not a serious person, notwithstanding his somewhat surprisingly good showing in the election in Texas. I think he's yesterday's news.
Well, so do you agree with me then that right now, as we stand here today, the leader in the clubhouse is Comrade Bernie?
It might be. It might be Comrade Bernie or maybe Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden would be the more formidable candidate. The socialists are getting all of the ink because what they say is so outrageous. I mean, it makes for good headlines. But I do believe that outside of the the coastal elites and their colonized outposts in various university towns across the country. Most people understand that socialism is a prescription for immiseration. Socialism, what are the platforms of socialism? The abolition of private property and the imposition of equality. How do you do that? Tyranny.
Yeah, well, that's a nice linear summary. Speaking of those college towns, Mr. Roger Kimball, Yale University graduate.
Here we go. What did your parents do to help you get into Yale?
Own it. Tell us what you did. What did you do, Roger Kimball?
Hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes, it was graduate school, only graduate school.
I knew you didn't play football at Yale.
Yes, that's an amusing thought. No, I did not.
So, what do you think of this whole college scandal scam? I mean, 700 people.
It's despicable. It's despicable. And I mean, the higher education establishment is it's a bubble. That would be the economist Herb Stein said that which cannot go on forever won't. And it's not just the fiscal instability. It's our colleges are bubbles of preposterousness. They play act at being triggered and being oppressed. They're the richest, most privileged generation in the history of the world. There's no safer space than a contemporary American college, and the social prestige that parents believe that a Yale degree or a Williams degree or a Princeton degree confers. This has fired them to do all kinds of strange and, in some cases, illegal things. And I suspect that this is the tip of the veritable iceberg. What we've seen so far is just the beginning of a culture of corruption in our higher education establishment that will lead to closing of a lot of campuses and the tarnishing of a lot of reputations.
How offended were you that USC was thrown in the mix as an elite school?
And I wore a black armband all day.
Right. Switching gears, Trump and his declaration of a national emergency, rebuked by the House, rebuked by the Senate, including a dozen Republican senators. His one-word response was veto! Should he follow through with that and just move on, despite the effort to turn this into some kind of internecine war within the Republican Party by the media?
Yeah, I think the most intelligent comment I've seen on this was by Ted Cruz. There's no question in my mind that there is a crisis at the border. We don't have a nation without borders, and our border is porous. We need to do something. We need to enforce our immigration laws, and some kind of physical barrier is probably an essential component of that. Since the Democrats, for purely political reasons, have been unwilling to fund this, even though of course they have proposed doing something very similar in the past. They're unwilling to do it because they hope that it will harm President Trump. So it's a purely political gambit on their part. Because they're unwilling to do their job and help protect the country, the president has had recourse to this expedient. Now, as Ted Cruz points out, yes, it's a national emergency. It is a crisis. The president is justified in taking advantage of this legislation, but this legislation may be ill-conceived. Why? Because it affords the executive sweeping powers that we may not want the executive to have. I mean, what happens if if you'll pardon this horrible image, a future President Gillibrand or future President Elizabeth Warren, heaven forfend, decides that drinking straws are a national emergency, or one's carbon footprint, or salt, or fossil fuels, and uses these powers to declare a national emergency that is really just a figment of this, a leftist fever dream. That would be a bad thing. But the way to solve this is to have the Congress do their job and revisit that 1976 enabling legislation and make a law. Get rid of this law, and then we'll see.
There was a third way introduced by Mike Lee that I thought the president should consider, which would have given him a 30-day window and would have tried to address these national emergencies that were declared 35 years ago that still persist because the government never gets back to close anything up. But President Trump chose not to embrace that idea. I'm not sure the Senate Democrats would have embraced it either, but there is at least a proposal out there offered by Mike Lee.
Yes. No, that's a reasonable sounding proposal. It's I think the president has to do something, but I too am worried about.
Well, speaking of doing something, do you think there'll be any political payback for those 12 Republican senators who didn't go along with President Trump's idea?
Well, maybe. I think the president is. It seems to be somebody who's, moves on. He doesn't strike me as being particularly vindictive.
And
move on.
And he kind of indicated he saw this coming and whatever, he'll veto it. They won't be override veto, and everybody moves
Congress
on.
to the courts.
He is Roger Kimball, editor of the New Criterion, Yale graduate, columnist for PJ Media. Roger, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, okay, thanks, bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.